Welcome to the AA Podcast, our little corner of the web where we are not afraid to discuss tough questions like,
when did nutrition, health, movement, and stress management become alternative medicine?
Where we embrace challenges in all aspects of life to become healthier and stronger versions of ourselves.
And where food and movement are the best kinds of medicine, and cooking meals at home is a revolutionary act. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AA Podcast. This is Ashley Olson.
And this is Andrea Crane.
So we're kind of geeking out over here because our platform that we use, which is Spotify, it's called Spotify for Podcasters. They just basically gave us an upgrade on how we record, which
we got an upgrade.
I don't know if you guys can tell a difference. We can tell a difference on our side.
We have a countdown.
Glorious.
You
they
guys,
give us like a countdown. It's amazing.
It's so profesh. I just feel famous sitting in my closet podcasting with our countdown.
But we were just kind of giggling about that because we feel very official. But anyway, we are coming back to you with part 2 of our thyroid health episodes. So if you are listening to this and you're like, oh, I didn't know there was a part 1, stop this episode right now and scroll back. Immediately stop. And go and listen to our last podcast episode on the first part of thyroid health. It will give you a very good foundation for what we are going to dive into today. And so with that, before we get into that, we are going to share our weekly Bible verse, and mine is Proverbs 17:22. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones.
I love that. I love that. All right, so mine is, once again, Old Testament also, Ecclesiastes 3:11, which is a pretty bleak book, but there is this gem. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end.
I don't know if I've ever heard that.
Oh, I love it. Well, you've heard the phrase, he has set eternity in the hearts of men.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
that's what this comes, that's where it comes from, is this verse here.
So good.
Yeah, I love that one.
All right. Just getting deep real fast. That's right.
I know. And now let's talk about thyroid.
So last episode, we laid the foundation on what hyperthyroid is, and then also dove into what your PCP, primary care provider, will typically run if you come to them with the symptoms of either a high or low thyroid. And we also kind of talked about why that is. And so we, on the functional health side, I mean, Andrea is technically the functional health person, but I mean,
you too, you're doing plenty of this.
We want to see a bigger and better picture of what is actually going on. And I don't think either one of us would be comfortable with a percentage, but I would say a majority potentially of primary care providers are doing very baseline blood work, and that is the TSH test. And so if you have gone to your provider, you've complained about some of the symptoms that we talked about in the previous episode, they've ran your TSH and they're like, everything looks good, go do XYZ, which we talked about in the last episode. But then you do XYZ and you still have all these symptoms. That we gave you some really good information, and I'm wanting to say
advice.
Advice that you can go back to, do a follow-up appointment with your PCP, talk to them about it, and get some more information if they are willing. Now, in this episode, we are going to do a deeper dive into common thyroid issues. So, I think we're going to start off with some hypothyroidism.
We're going to start with hyper.
Oh, sorry, hyperthyroidism. Sorry.
Yeah. So as you recall from the last episode, hyperthyroidism is not nearly as common as hypo. So, Andrea, why would we be starting with this? Well, that's a great question. The reason we're starting with this is because I want to share a common misconception about hyperthyroidism that is linked to hypothyroidism. So the first thing I want to talk about is autoimmunity in light of hyperthyroidism. So we talked a little bit about autoimmunity, and we will talk more about it here in the next topic. But for right now, autoimmunity is where the body attacks its own tissue. And so in the case of autoimmune thyroid disease, we've got two primary types of antibodies that can attack the thyroid that lead to low thyroid, right? So they're slowly destroying the thyroid gland. But then there's another one that leads to hyperthyroidism. Okay, this is not the only type of hyperthyroidism, but I wanted to bring this up because this is really, really important. So we talked about all the symptoms involved with hyperthyroidism in the last episode. So if you haven't listened, please, please, please stop what you're doing and go back, please. But I want to talk about Graves' disease. So this is the primary autoimmune reason for hyperthyroidism or too much thyroid hormone. So how can that be if the body is attacking its own thyroid? Well, here's how that can be. Essentially, Graves' disease is where the body makes an antibody that looks like TSH. So remember what TSH does. It goes to the thyroid hormone, it knocks on the door and says, hey, we need more thyroid hormone, right? So if your body is creating all these antibodies that lock into that TSH receptor, the end result is stimulating the thyroid constantly to make more, make more, make more, make more. That's why you end up with hyperthyroidism, okay? Now, here's the part that I really wanted to talk to people about. Hashimoto's. This is the most common cause of low thyroid in the country is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So this is an autoimmune disease where two antibodies in particular attack the thyroid. They result in low thyroid hormone, okay? Far more common than high thyroid. But here's what I want you to know. There are stages of Hashimoto's that can lead to hyperthyroidism. So you can get these wild swings of high thyroid, then low thyroid, then high thyroid, then low thyroid. And that is all a feature of Hashimoto's. So if you have Hashis, you don't automatically have low thyroid all of the time. It can swing wildly. So it's really, really important if you're going to do anything about the antibodies. It's really important to figure out, what is this? Is this Graves' disease or is this Hashis? And we can do that with antibody testing, but it's almost exclusively done in a functional setting versus a conventional setting. Now, if you go to endocrinology, I am not super familiar with all of the commonly run tests in a specialty like endocrinology. But I can almost guarantee you, if a patient comes suspicion of Graves' disease, they're going to get turfed to endocrinology with a referral. And most primary cares will punt. Hopefully, endocrinology will then order the antibody test to know if it's Hashis or Graves, so that they can act appropriately. But essentially, let me tell you what the treatment for Graves' disease is in a conventional setting. It is killing the thyroid with either medication, radiation, or surgery. All right? So we're going to cut it out, we're going to burn it out, or we're going to poison it. With one of those three options. That's all we got. And so then, once they've killed it, then you are left with a lifelong supplementation because you have no thyroid hormone, right? No thyroid means no thyroid hormone, so then you're left with lifelong supplementation. Here's the problem with lifelong supplementation. Sometimes this is the only way. It's the only way. But the problem with that is, in a normal body, the thyroid thyroid hormone levels will fluctuate. They will go up, they will go down, in response to hormones, in response to stress level, for women, in response to menstrual cycling. All of those different things can cause the thyroid to go up and down. All right. So when we're treating with lifelong thyroid hormone, because the patient no longer has a thyroid gland because we've killed it or taken it out, then you don't get those nuanced levels of thyroid hormone. Okay, so the um, the the thyroid that we give daily, now you can try to mimic it. Like you can try to say, okay, I need you to take a little more of your thyroid hormone during these times in your life, or I need you to take a little less thyroid hormone during these times in your life. So we can try and mimic that biological cycle, but it's very, very difficult and requires constant testing. And so the most common thing is just you put somebody on thyroid hormone and you test them every 6 months. You test that TSH level every 6 months and you call it a day. So that's how conventional medicine treats Graves' disease or hyperthyroidism. Now, I want to tell you though, if it's not Graves' disease, if it's Hashimoto's, we don't want to kill the thyroid, right? And if they don't know the difference between these two diseases because they haven't run the tests, then we end up giving, iodine 131, which is a radiation that is administered orally. The thyroid gland, I think I read somewhere that there are other glands that also take up iodine, but it has been common knowledge for a very, very long time that the thyroid is the only gland that takes up iodine. So don't hold me to this. Ashley's Googling furiously right now. This may or may not be true. I thought I had read something recently that said iodine is taken up by different tissues than just the thyroid, but I could be wrong. Anyway, so iodine, we like attach this little bomb to an iodine molecule, and it's called iodine 131. We give it to you orally. It takes this bomb to the thyroid, right? Because iodine is taken up by the thyroid, and then it explodes. Like it slowly irradiates the thyroid until it kills it. So anyway, that's how we treat it. Now, in functional medicine, I would hope that we would be a little more nuanced in our testing and in our treatment. So to figure out, well, what is this? Is this Graves' disease? If it's Graves' disease, can we affect the level of antibodies? Can we stop the thyroid hormones from or can we stop the thyroid antibodies from attacking and from creating all of this, pseudo TSH that causes all of this elevated thyroid? So anyway, there are things that we can do functionally to treat both Hashis and Graves, a little more unsuccessfully in Graves. But that's just kind of the reality of the situation. But that's what hyperthyroidism is, and that's how we treat it in conventional and functional.
Can you this might be a silly question but whatever. I don't believe in silly questions. I think
No, there are no silly questions.
Okay. Can you have both hypo and Graves?
Yes, because if you go for such a long period of time, so here's the thing. Graves' disease can throw you into a situation called thyrotoxicosis or thyroid storm. This can kill you. Mm-hmm. That's why we have to treat Graves. Normally, I suppose if you had a person with Graves' disease, you gave them no medical treatment whatsoever. Let's suppose that they didn't die from thyrotoxicosis. Let's suppose that the antibodies were able to just do their thing and they didn't quite kill you, and you never went in for the symptoms, even though they are profound. You just never sought any medical care at all. Eventually, it would probably destroy your thyroid to the point where you became hypothyroid, except that nobody would probably get to that point because the symptoms really are profound. Like you start to get the exophthalmos where your eyeballs are kind of pushing out of your skull and you can't quite close your eyelids around them. Like that's yeah, anyway, there are some pretty significant symptoms associated with hyperthyroid, and you would definitely be able to tell, and you would be seeking some help.
Yeah. And then when you have either one of these, is medication of some sort absolutely required?
If you have Graves or Hashis, we'll talk about Hashis here in a minute. But if you have hyperthyroidism because of Graves' disease or because of Hashis, it does need to be treated. It does need to be evaluated because, again, thyrotoxicosis is a real thing. And if you've ever known someone or yourself been through a thyroid storm, it is a medical emergency. And so we can't risk that happening. But after the emergency is over, while we're treating with medication like Tapazole or something like that, that's not going to kill the thyroid, then we can work behind the scenes for a period of time. As long as the patient is stable, you can try to work behind the scenes with functional, you know, measures.
Okay. All right.
And so the next thing that we want to talk about is low thyroid. And the reason this is going to be the bulk of our show because this is the bulk of thyroid diagnoses is going to be low thyroid.
Mhm.
Um, so
I will say though, I do know several people with Hashis and Graves. Not
mm,
necessarily they have the same or they have both, but I do know quite a few
yeah,
people that have
oh yeah,
Hashis and I do know people that have
yeah.
Graves.
Now I would question unless they're seeing someone that has really drilled down on that antibody testing.
Mhm.
A lot of times people will just slap a Graves label on it. If you are hyperthyroid, they will call it Graves disease.
Okay.
Okay? So it could be Hashis only.
Huh?
And that's all I'm saying. That wild swing between high and low, that can be Hashis kind of ramping up.
Okay. So get your tests done.
That's right. Keep pushing.
Yes, yeah. All right, so low thyroid, so hypothyroid, right?
Uh-huh. Yep. And so the first thing I want to talk about is common medications that we use to treat low thyroid. And I'll just tell you, levothyroxine is really demonized in the lay functional community. So people who talk about functional medicine, they talk about natural cures, they talk about all of these things that we talk about, and I embrace, obviously, that's what I work in. But we have really bastardized levothyroxine, but I'll tell you, I've got patients stabilized on this who come to me and they're very happy on it.
Why is it demonized? Just because it's
It's,
in Western medicine?
uh, you know, I think it's demonized because of those patients who don't do well on it.
Mm,
Okay. Um, and they are roundly ignored by conventional medicine. And so I think that's the reason is that those stories have been trickling out for the last 15 years or so about, hey, I was on levothyroxine. I still felt like trash. My TSH was in line, and so nobody would help me. So there are other options for treating thyroid outside of levothyroxine, but conventional medicine, again, a lot of times it takes some serious arm twisting. Like 15 years ago, you would be really hard pressed to find a conventional provider that would even let you try another type of thyroid medicine. So here's the thing with levothyroxine. For the people that it works for, it's great. They get their energy back, they feel better. Like it fixes the symptoms. It doesn't fix the antibodies, you guys. It doesn't fix the antibodies. None of these meds will fix the antibodies, okay?
that's
Just so you
important.
know, that's very important. Um, but in a conventional sense, remember, as we said in the last episode, I went into why your conventional provider will not order an antibody test. So if you want to know why, go back and listen to the first one.
Which if
Um,
you're still listening and haven't listened to the first one, then you
I
didn't
know,
listen to
and
us in the beginning of the episode.
you're completely ignoring us at that point. but you know why they're not running the antibody test, and now you know why it doesn't matter to them as long as your TSH is back in range. Okay.
Now there are generics of this one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there are generics of levothyroxine. There are lots of companies that make this. This is a super old drug. It either goes by Synthroid, Levothyroid, Levoxyl. Actually, Levoxyl might be liothyronine. No, that's Cytomel. Yeah, Levoxyl I think is another T4. What are you laughing at?
I just can't believe all this is in your head.
Oh.
Like,
I know it's probably pushed out some really important information too. But anyway, those are the brand names commonly associated with T4. But you'll also see generics given levothyroxine. And again, I have patients stabilized and happy on this drug all day long, all the time. Okay, so it is a synthetic T4. Now, that's why we went into what all of those things were in the last episode. So now you know what T4 is. You know that it's inactive. You know how it becomes active. All right. So that's what levothyroxine or Synthroid is. Synthetic T4. So the next medication that is, it's not so commonly used, but I am seeing it more in the last several years. I will actually have patients come to me on this. Now, what that means is usually they've been to another functional provider, and for whatever reason, they've had to switch. But I have seen some people on this. It's called liothyronine. The brand name is Cytomel, and this is T3. So this is it's like levothyroxine in that it is the synthetic version of the natural thyroid hormone. Okay, so remember we got T4, we got T3. T4 is levothyroxine, T3 is liothyronine. Okay, so sometimes you'll have patients who, and we can play with these things. Like we've got lots of flexibility when it comes to symptom management. So, if I've got somebody that is happy on their levothyroxine, but I've been stabilized on this for the last 2 years, but now I'm starting to feel that sluggishness again, and I'm starting to feel this, starting to feel that, then what I can do is sometimes I can add some T3. Again, I will test and look at labs, and let's say their T4 is fine, but their T3 is either at the low end of normal or it's below normal. So they might be having some issues and they're not as efficiently converting T4 to T3. So I can add synthetic T3. I could just add it. So we can kind of play around with that. Now, the last thing that we can do is there's something called NDT, or natural desiccated thyroid. So what this is you guys, it sounds so weird, and I know it, but it's not weird when you think about it. We use porcine thyroid. You know what porcine is?
no.
Pork. It's pig. It is derived from pig. So
Yeah.
bovine source is going to be from a cow. Porcine or porcine source is going to be from a pig. So a porcine, naturally desiccated thyroid, like Armour. You've probably heard of Armour thyroid. Well, what does Armour also make? They make pepperoni and hot dogs. Where do you think that comes from? Pigs. So they got a lot of pig thyroid sitting around from their plants, and so it's another product line that they have. So literally, the company that makes pepperoni and hot dogs, they also make an awesome thyroid product called natural desiccated thyroid, or Armour thyroid. So what this is it's ground up pig thyroid. And the beauty of it is, when you think about some of the internal things that we use from pigs, we use heart valves from pigs. They're very, very similar to ours. It turns out their thyroid is almost identical to ours. And so insulin, we used to get porcine insulin. We used to get cow insulin. We used to get dog insulin. That was like way, 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 way back in the beginning. That's an interesting story. But so we use pork products for all kinds of things because they're very closely related to humans in that way. So their natural desiccated thyroid is always always going to be a pork product. So there are certain kinds of this. You can get Armor, you can get something called NP thyroid. If a patient doesn't do well on one, you can switch them to the other. If a patient doesn't do well on any, then I will switch to levothyroxine. We can add in some liothyronine. Like, there's all kinds of different permutations that you can get with this. But those are the kind of the classic medications. Now, the thing that I like about natural desiccated thyroid is, remember last episode how we talked about some of those, je ne sais quoi elements of thyroid hormones, right? Like, we don't really know beyond the T4 and T3. We know that there's some other elements in there, but we don't really know what they are. So God makes things perfectly, right? So the natural desiccated thyroid contains all of those things that we don't really know what they are yet, right? So all of those cofactors, all of those, potentially other types of thyroid, those fractions, those mini fractions that we haven't even identified yet. They're all contained in the natural desiccated thyroid. So that's another reason that I like it. So let's talk. Yeah, you got a
Why?
question?
Well, yeah. So, I don't know if you're gonna get into this. Like, are you gonna get into like, hey, I YouTubed some natural things to
Oh, yeah.
do for my
Yeah.
thyroid, and I have this supplement line that I'm doing.
Uh-huh.
Whatever it is, I don't
Mhm.
have one in mind. Um, but there's definitely things like people will do a YouTube and they're like, well, if you
Yep.
have this, then you should do
Mhm.
XYZ.
Yeah.
Okay,
No, I'm
but
definitely getting into that.
you are okay.
Mhm.
So basically, with the levothyroxine, the
Mhm.
thyronine, and the
Uh-huh.
NTD, is it kind of like if you don't feel good on the levothyroxine, okay, let's give it a try. If you don't feel good,
Mhm.
then we'll try the liothyronine, and then if you don't feel good,
Um,
maybe do the NTD.
Maybe it's not quite that simple because I'm running labs like every 4 to 6 weeks to
Okay.
see where
Oh,
your labs are. And so if you're getting to the place where you're a little hyperthyroid and you're still telling me, no, I still don't feel good, then we need to look elsewhere, because I am never going to treat a patient to the point of hyperthyroidism.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so yeah,
So I guess my question is like, how do you know
mm,
which one that you need? I mean,
based
obviously,
on labs and symptoms.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
it's labs and symptoms, and so it's kind of an intricate dance, and we do this with hormones too. I do this with, female and male hormone replacement therapy. Like, I'll tweak estrogen, I'll tweak DHEA, I'll tweak progesterone. They're that's super complex, but yeah, there's lots of tweaking involved
okay.
here.
So that's another reason why you need a provider that you trust
Yeah, well,
and
and you
that
can't
you're
get these meds without prescriptions, so
right, right.
yeah.
But like somebody that's willing to do these
Mhm.
tests on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, and this is really undertreated, um, in in this country. It may be in other, European nations. It may be undertreated as well. Um, I don't know what their conventional medicine parameters are, but this is a condition called subclinical hypothyroidism. Now, I've just said that I will not treat a patient into a hyperthyroid state. I will not do it, because there's a lot of, I talked about the thyroid toxicosis. I talked about thyroid storm. Um, it takes a lot to get patients to that point. However, you want to exercise an abundance of caution, because too much thyroid is really, really bad. It's cardiotoxic, and that sounds just as bad as it is. So, subclinical hypothyroidism, though, is, let's just say, so the person who presents with this, their TSH is going to be in the normal range. Okay? It may be in the high-ish end of normal, but it's still in the normal range. All right? Now, their T4 and their T3, if someone were to go that far and order those, they are in the normal-ish range also. They may be in the low-ish range of normal. Their T4 might be right smack dab beautifully in the middle of the range, but their T3 might be at the low end of normal, but still normal. This patient comes to me and is like, oh gosh, I'm super constipated. I just can't, I can't launch enough energy to get everything done that I need to during the day. My hair's falling out. I've got these ongoing symptoms. If you want to know what those are, go back to last episode. But they come with this constellation of hypothyroid symptoms. And so I look at their labs. Obviously, their labs are normal, but they have these symptoms. So I have enough wiggle room in their labs to go ahead and give them thyroid hormone. Now, in this particular patient, I'm not going to start them on levothyroxine. I'm going to start them on some Armour Thyroid. And I have very low doses that I can give of this particular drug. And so I'm going to start there. And so this would be considered a subclinical, which means that they're not quite at that clinical diagnosis level. Like I can't point to a lab value and say, clearly hypothyroidic, right? Because they're in range technically, but they've got all these symptoms. So you don't treat a lab value, you treat the patient in front of you. But that said, if they're already at the high end of normal for T3, T4, they're already at the low end of normal for TSH, I'm not giving that person thyroid regardless of how symptomatic they are. I've got to go looking somewhere else because something else is wrong. So anyway, that's kind of the quick and dirty on subclinical hypothyroidism. There are a lot of patients running around that really feel crummy that could use a little whiff of thyroid because they just don't feel their best at their current levels. So that's subclinical hypothyroidism. Sometimes conventional medicine practices won't even acknowledge that this is a diagnosis, but we absolutely do. Now, here's the other thing. I will not just prescribe thyroid hormone in a vacuum of any other interventions. I will also talk to them about stress reduction, diet and lifestyle modifications, supplemental nutrients, which I'm going to talk about later, and then I will also add the medication. So it's not just throwing prescriptions at things. It's let's get to the bottom of why you are feeling so crummy, and let's give you a little thyroid to help and see if this alleviates symptoms as well, because again, I have that room in their range. They're sitting at the low end of normal. It's fine to bump them up a little bit. So anyway, that's subclinical hypothyroidism in a nutshell. And now I'm going to go into overt or frank hypothyroidism. So this is legit hypothyroid that is verifiable by labs. And generally, this person is going to have an elevated TSH, although it may be in range for a conventional lab, but my functional labs, generally I will have a tighter range. And so just because your TSH is in range on a conventional panel, I like to use a little tighter range than that. So, and let's see. So here's what happens on the low thyroid. So I have a patient. They come in. Either their TSH is elevated or their T4, T3 is low. Their reverse T3 is way higher than I like it. So they would be a low thyroid patient. So now remember what we said, up to 95% of all of these low thyroid patients are caused by autoimmunity. So we've got to do, so I'm running labs, right? At this point, I'm running labs. I'm going to see if they've got antibodies that I can look at. And if they do, then that is going to that is going to give me the go ahead to suggest all of these different interventions. And it can be a little overwhelming. I suggest people start low, go slow with these things, because the kind of changes that I'm talking about, they're not easy, but they will serve you well over the long term. So let's talk first about how conventional medicine treats low thyroid. This, again, remember, this is frank low thyroid. So this is, your TSH might be 17, which is, let's say the range goes between like 1 and 3 or 1 and 4. Your TSH is 17, or let's say your TSH is 76. Yeah, it happens. So that's crazy. So conventional medicine will say, "Oh, you got to get on some levothyroxine." So they'll give you levothyroxine, again, synthetic T4. They'll give that to you until your TSH is back in range. And this drug will absolutely put your TSH back in range. Now, whether it abates your symptoms or not, that is up to your body and its physiology. It may or may not do anything for your symptoms, but it will put your TSH back in range.
So if
And
that's
now,
the case, then does that mean that something else is going on? Or not
no,
necessarily?
no, not necessarily, because there are things, and I would submit that we have not even discovered all of the things that artificially suppress TSH in the body. One of them that I do know about is that if you are stressed and you have, lots of cortisol in your system, then your TSH will become suppressed. So if let's say your TSH, without all the cortisol input, without all the stress, without all the inflammation, your TSH would be at a 17. But because of all that stuff, because of all the cortisol, because of all the stress, your TSH is now at a 4. And a conventional practice says, well, you're in range.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're not in range. So that's why we need all of these other things to go into our treatment options. So from a functional standpoint, I'll show you what I go through when I have a patient like this. So conventional treatment, I write a script for levothyroxine. It takes me 32 seconds and the patient is out the door, right? I treat the lab. I treat the TSH level. Functional medicine, I take an insanely detailed history. I want to know about fertility. I want to know about menstrual issues. I want to know about energy level, digestive function, hair loss, all of those things we talked about in the first episode. I want to know about all those things. I want a cholesterol lab. Like, there are so many things that I want. Now, I will also do a physical exam. Okay. So in that physical exam, again, just like we talked about in the last episode, I'm going to look for signs and symptoms of anemia on your person. I'm going to look at your eyebrows. If you want to know why, listen to the previous episode. I'm going to look for keratosis pilaris, or those bumps on the backs of your arms. I'll look for the orange discolorations in palms and nasal labial folds. Like, all of those things I'm doing on physical exam. Okay. Then I'm going to order labs. And now my labs include more than a TSH. This is a complete thyroid panel with antibodies. Then I will also order an iron panel because, as we know from the last time, iron and ferritin levels are related to hypothyroidism. So I want to know where your iron levels are. I want a complete blood cell count, again, to back up that anemia, that potential anemia diagnosis. I want to know where your cholesterol is, because if you're mildly elevated cholesterol, that's just a nail in the coffin for hypothyroidism. Then my medication selection, I've already been through this, but we can start anywhere. I can start with some levothyroxine. If I have a patient that can't afford natural desiccated thyroid, then you know what? We're going to start with levothyroxine. If they don't feel good on that, I'm going to add another insurance covered med like liothyronine, and we're going to
So
try
that's a
and get
good
there.
distinction. So NDT
Mhm.
is not covered by insurance.
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the patient can fight for it. I can say, we can try the levothyroxine, and I can show in my chart notes that this patient failed levothyroxine. It did not work. They are still symptomatic. Therefore, we need you to cover this, like with a prior authorization. But sometimes it doesn't work. The other medication that I have at my disposal is low-dose naltrexone. Now, I'm not going to get too far into the weeds on this one, but this drug can have some really immunomodulating effects for people with various types of autoimmune disease. It also has very few side effects, and so the risk-benefit profile on this drug is beautiful. So I will try it. Like, like I will absolutely try it on somebody.
Why
Yeah.
not try that first, or is it because of insurance?
Oh, yeah, insurance usually will not cover this. I'm prescribing off-label at this point with something like a low-dose naltrexone. So yeah, if again, if they can afford it, it's made by a compounding pharmacy, has to be made by a compounding pharmacy. It's not available in the low doses that I need for immunomodulation, but that is an option. Now let's talk about supplements. So I will also, if there is an autoimmune component, which again, there almost always is, then I will talk about magnesium. I will talk about selenium. I will talk about betaine with pepsin because of the hypochlorhydria. Again, discussed in the last episode. Now you know why. I will talk about iron supplementation because of a potentially low ferritin. I will talk about systemic enzymes, which can be used to lower antibody production and inflammation. I will also talk about B complex to address energy levels, to address B vitamins are very often cofactors in lots and lots of different mechanisms in the body. So a good B complex with methylated B vitamins, that's important, is really good. Also, vitamin D. It's the last but certainly not least on this list because vitamin D and low levels of vitamin D have been related to antibody production. We've known about that for years and years. So autoimmune patients automatically go on vitamin D. And so that's one of the things that I will have them take. And then the next thing that I want to talk about, so further, I will recheck their blood work 30 days after any new thyroid medication or a change in dose. And that could be just a TSH. Like if they had a crazy TSH, then that might be a good marker for them. And so I'll just run a quick, cheap TSH and we'll get that back. Hey, it's headed in the right direction. Let's keep doing what we're doing. Okay. Or if their TSH was fairly normal, but their other numbers were a little wacky, then I will run the other numbers on this 30-day check. Now, I will also do a full panel check within 3 to 6 months so I can really see that what we're doing is affecting antibodies levels. Okay.
Yeah.
There are also dietary changes. Gluten and dairy free are the two biggies for thyroid. And so
If
we
you
will.
haven't already, go
Yeah.
back to our autoimmune episodes. We dive
Yep.
deep into the nutrition portion of this. So,
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I forgot about that. But yeah, go back and listen to that. And then the final thing that I want to talk about that is so poorly understood is iodine. Okay?
yeah, yeah.
There are people out there recommending insane amounts of iodine. This is a very poorly researched. These are crazy recommendations. It makes me very unhappy to see people just like drinking Lugol's solution because they heard some podcaster or some YouTube video saying that, oh, you need mega doses of iodine. Well, let me tell you something. So iodine is another one of those Goldilocks kind of elements in the body. And I just want you to understand. So those goiters that people used to get at the turn of the previous 2 centuries, when they didn't have enough iodine in their diet. That is a frank iodine deficiency. You can see a goiter formation, and that's terrible. And we don't really have a lot of that anymore. One, because of the advent of iodized salt, but two, we've got other ways to get iodine in our diets. We've got various things from the sea. We've got iodized salt in like all processed foods. So there's iodine in lots and lots of places. So I also need you to understand that having too much iodine, like these crazy doses that people are talking about, can also cause a goiter. So it can also cause low thyroid. It can also cause high thyroid. And we've talked about some of the dangers with hyperthyroidism. And so with people just going out on their own, and taking massive doses of iodine, please don't do that. If you're not getting answers from your provider, then go somewhere else. Find somebody who will listen to you. If you are in the Colorado or Kansas region, I am now licensed in Kansas. I actually am licensed in Colorado. I'm getting licensed in Kansas. Ashley and I will have some exciting things coming up for those of you who have autoimmunity and you need treatment and you can't find it, or maybe you have a primary care that you like, but they just can't dive into this with you. Then Ashley and I are going to, in the upcoming months, we're going to be talking to you guys about some things that we have on tap. So hold tight. Exciting things are coming. But just so you know, like keep digging for information.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I got on this today.
Yeah. And kind of how we ended the last episode, like, and then reemphasizing what Andrea says, keep digging, keep asking
Mm-hmm.
questions. And again, we as patients have such, um, not, I don't want to say authority, but we have so much more than that we can ask. We
Mm-hmm.
should never feel like we should be suppressed, or
Right.
that our symptoms are not what we think they are, or that
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of a mental case. But
Mm-hmm.
we should be pressing our primary care, and kind of to Andrew's point, like if they're not listening to you and they don't want to listen to you, you have the right to find somebody else.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds, and it is exhausting, especially when you
Mm-hmm.
already are dealing with fatigue and brain fog and lack of sleep and all these things. We understand, but your health is very important,
Mm-hmm.
and it's important for somebody to want to help you feel better, especially when you don't feel good. So,
Yeah.
these this was awesome. I know thyroid issues are rampant, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that probably more people have it than we probably even
Mm-hmm.
realize.
Yeah.
And probably some people are going untreated on some things,
Mm-hmm.
because of thyroid issues, and they're just chalking it up to being, like you said, older, a a new mom, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is. And if your gut is telling you that that's not a good or a good excuse, then
Mm-hmm.
listen to that gut, because
Yep.
your gut has that'd
Yeah.
be a cool episode too,
That
just on the gut brain
Oh my gosh.
connection, and
Yeah.
like
That
what
gut
that
that
is.
hasn't pooped in 4 days. Yes, let's look
Yeah.
at thyroid.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Of
exactly. Well, thanks, Andrea, for breaking this all down for us.
course.
And I hope that this was helpful for you guys. And again, if you feel like any of these symptoms are something that you're dealing with and you're needing to dive deeper, I hope this episode was helpful in feeling like you have more information at your fingertips to ask more
Mm-hmm.
questions and understand a little bit better. So, as always, if you want to get in contact with us, you can always reach us on the socials, but you can also email us at askAApodcast@gmail.com, and we would love to hear from you. So I think that's all that we have for today, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Bye. provided in the AA podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. The podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical advice.